Hey everybody, John here from the Sports Department, going over the LEC Week 2 Day 1 slate. Should be a good one. We had a fun little Week 1, a lot of upsets, a lot of weirdness, and we'll see how that's going to translate going into Week 2 here. Let's start off with the first matchup, Vitality and Rogue. This one might look a little closer on paper than it actually is. Vitality, some upsets in the first weekend, but let's not mistake ourselves. This is not really likely to be even a playoff team. If they are a playoff team, they're probably a low playoff team. Rogue, on the other hand, at least as far as the first weekend is concerned, look like the best team in the league, along with Fnatic. Not just the fact that they're 3-0, but the way that they were actually playing. They looked very, very good. Rogue, I think, has a very large edge in this matchup. I think the odds are pretty fair. I could even move it maybe even a little farther towards Rogue. I really like their chances to get a win right there. Misfits at 1-2 at the moment and minus 185. SK Gaming 2-1 at the moment and plus 135. Similar situation, I feel. Although Misfits is not nearly on the level of Rogue, but I do think this is a team that's probably playoff contending. SK Gaming looked a little bit better the first week than we'd expected from them. They looked solid. I'm still not convinced that this is a team that's going to be like a playoff battler. I feel very similarly to SK Gaming as I do with Vitality. Probably next split they're looking like they're going to try to battle in for the last spot in the playoffs maybe. In fact, I would argue that probably one of these two teams will battle their way into the playoffs. The other one will probably miss. It's possible that both of them could miss, but I think we've seen enough improvement from the two teams to think that probably one of these two teams will be able to hold on and move forward. Misfits are rightful favorite at minus 185. I think that's reasonable. I think SK Gaming you're going to probably see a pretty decent amount of action on, considering they looked pretty good in Week 1. Misfits didn't look great, and SK is the underdog. Game number 3, G2 and Schalke. This is a real fun matchup for me as far as the slate is concerned. It's a pretty standard strategy of mine in GPPs to play, especially in big field GPPs, to play a lot of G2's opponent. Usually they have pretty low ownership. When G2 loses, they tend to give up a lot of fantasy points to their opponents. So G2's opponents, even though G2 doesn't lose that often, their opponents usually make a pretty good GPP play, especially the bigger the field is. This is a week where I don't even think I'm going for it. Not even necessarily because I think Schalke looked awful Week 1, which they did. It's a combination of them looking awful Week 1. G2 is going to be out for blood after that first week, I think. They had a lot of talk on social media about how they hadn't really practiced for Week 1. That was probably a wake-up call for them that they went 1-2. I think they come out pretty well prepared here and kind of smash Schalke. Jeez. I will say, it might not lead to the highest scoring game. It's hard for me to tell sometimes if G2 are just going to want to come out here and win in 16 minutes or if they're going to want to play with their food a little bit. Possible position where maybe we could look away from G2 a little bit. You're definitely going to play some G2. If you're playing GPPs or cash this weekend, you should be playing G2. But I might find my way away from them a little bit more than normal in case they just decide to come out here and put Schalke straight into a body bag. Origen against XL. This is real crappy for me with XL because I do want to get some action on XL. I had a decent amount of action on them last weekend. They went 0-3. Didn't go great for me. I think the team is better than they've shown. I'm just not sure this is the matchup I want them in. Origin's in a similar situation to G2. Highly touted coming into the year. Nuke Duck has not looked very good, and he's been on a decline for a while, so maybe this is just the split where Origen falls apart. If Alfari doesn't have a good split or Xerxes doesn't have a good split, Nuke Duck's already not having a good split. They could maybe just fall apart this split, but something tells me that they beat XL here, and it makes it tough because I'd really like to get involved with XL. If they were up against a lot of these other teams, I would want to get involved with them. Sorry, I got something stuck in my throat. Just not the best matchup for it. Fnatic and Mad Lions, great matchup. Going to be tons of fun to watch. Could definitely go either way. I love Mad Lions as a live dog here. They fit with me more in the territory of like an SK who's probably pretty live. Those would probably be my favorite two underdogs for the weekend as far as like win percentage. XL's reasonable. You might be able to get them at a pretty low ownership. a lot more lopsided matchups this weekend than there were last weekend. There were a lot of very close matchups last weekend. Let's take a look at favorites real quick here. We'll be looking at Rogue and Misfits and G2, Fnatic and Origen. Going position by position. Fnatic. Yes, Fnatic highest with G2, and then Origen, Misfits, and Rogue at the bottom. Rogue at the bottom doesn't surprise me. They weren't that bloody of a team last split. They haven't looked like they're going to be that much bloodier this split, so we'll see where that goes. In the jungle, G2 or Fnatic, G2, Origen, Misfits, and Rogue again at the bottom. Seeing G2 at the top for mid lane, Caps. Larson always projects above the rest of Rogue, so that's not super surprising. Fnatic in the middle on that one. You'll notice Fnatic has been towards the top in the other two positions, now in the middle. Maybe Nemesis is the guy you avoid if you go with a Fnatic stack. Forbidden and Nuke Duck at the very bottom. No surprise there as well. We talked about it in last week's video, but Nuke Duck is the lowest scorer, and I believe he also allows the lowest score in the league to his opponents, so you have to be careful with his opponents as well. At 80 carry, G2 at the top along with Fnatic, and then Origen, Misfits, and Rogue at the bottom. G2 and Fnatic at the top, Misfits, Origen, and Rogue at the bottom again. So Rogue projecting the bottom everywhere. Vitality was not a team that gave up a lot of points last split. They've been a little bit bloodier as this season started. You might give Rogue a little bit of extra credit for Vitality scoring. But in general, it's kind of the story of the LEC, which is the only unfortunate thing about the LEC. Fnatic and G2. Like, that's just the story of the LEC. You just want to be on those guys, like, a lot of the time, and it's looking kind of that way again. I don't hate throwing some Mad Lions in there. Origen, you could try out, because XL is a team that has traditionally given up a lot of points. This Misfits and SK Gaming match, I think, probably ends up being relatively low scoring. Let's look what the underdogs look like. So Schalke projecting the highest. You're probably going to see that at every position playing against G2. Doesn't mean that they're going to win very often, just that their projection in a win would be very high. XL and Mad showing up next. And we're kind of going to see the same thing. Schalke with XL and Mad, and then Vitality and SK showing up at the bottom, just telling us that Vitality, Rogue, and SK Misfits matchup in general are not high scoring. Neither side of the matchup is looking good. Schalke again. Mad. XL goes down towards the bottom here and puts SK up into the middle, but it's still Schalke at the top, followed by generally Mad, sometimes XL. At 80 carry, Schalke, XL, Vitality. So this is where Mad is actually projecting the lowest comparatively is Karzi, which is kind of interesting because Karzi is definitely a very integral part of how Mad plays, but he's actually the guy that's comparatively projecting the worst on the team so far. And then at support, no surprise, Kaiser on top. Kaiser, a very involved support. So actually it looks kind of like, depending on who you're pairing with, that Karzi might be the guy that you want to sit out of your Mad Lions stack if you're playing Mad Lions, which is kind of interesting to me. With the underdogs, the projections isn't as important. It's more about identifying one that can win and pairing them with the favorite that's going to score the most points, which we kind of went over. It's your standard G2 Fnatic. When looking at ownership, because that's a thing that comes up a lot in GPPs in Europe. The ownership's really important because G2 is universally the highest owned team. And the big question a number of weeks is it worth pivoting over to Fnatic instead of G2? That's the big question a lot of weeks. Is it worth, maybe we gamble that Fnatic's the one this week instead of G2? That honestly ends up being the question more often than not. This week, I have a feeling that Origen might actually outpace Fnatic. They're up against XL. I know a lot of people are using win percentages, like Vegas line win percentages, but I know a lot of people are also paying attention to how many points the opponents give up, and XL does give up a lot of points. In our modeling here, Origen hasn't showed up that well, but a lot of other people are looking at different statistics, and some of the statistics they're showing might have Origen looking like a better play than Fnatic. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Fnatic and Origen are switched, but this is going to be my guess for the moment. Next up, probably Rogue. They're a very big favorite, and they're playing a very easy team. You could honestly see Rogue move up above Origen too. There's just something that tells me Origen's just generally been over-owned, and that matchup against XL, I get the feeling people are really going to want to be on Origen if they're not on G2. It might also matter who fits the best with G2 and Fnatic. People are probably more likely to be on the teams that are going to fit well with G2 and Fnatic, but for the moment I'll keep this as my estimate. And then Misfits, I would imagine, would be the next highest owned. For the underdogs, I'm guessing the highest owned underdog will be SK Gaming. That's right there with Misfits, pretty similar. And then I think Mad Lions for sure will be next. They're a very liked team. They're in a matchup that projects to score a lot of points when they win. Perfect spot for them. I would guess Vitality comes next. They looked reasonable in week 1. People will see the 2-1 next to their names. A lot of casual fans see the 2-1 against a 3-0. What's the difference? I mean, I could see definitely a lot of that happening. And then XL, I would imagine, will come in second to last, followed by Schalke, almost certainly being last. There's some chance that people will go with the strategy that I use week by week, and they'll put Schalke maybe above XL or above Vitality in ownership, but I don't know. I don't know that people will want to be playing against G2 this weekend, so I would guess your ownership plays out something like this. The only part I'm not that confident in is these three here. Very confident G2 will be the highest owned. There might be some flip-flopping around between these. If G2 is not the highest owned, it's probably because they're in a lot of 2 stacks, because they're very expensive this weekend. It might be that their players look a little bit under-owned because they're mostly being 2 stacked instead of 4 stacked, but I think they'll be a very highly owned team. And Origen, Fnatic, and Rogue kind of in any order. I have a kind of inkling it might be Origen, but I wouldn't be surprised if both of these two were ahead of Origen. I'd be surprised if Origen wasn't in the top 4, though. And then I'm pretty confident in this portion. I think this is looking about right. Possibly Mad Lions and SK Gaming switched, but I don't think so. I think it's going to look something like this. Looking at possible cash game lineups, let's see. Who does G2 fit with? Let's try Rogue. You'd have to play captain. You'd have to play the team at captain, which gives you a 202 projection. Let's try a different team. Let's try them with Origen. Not even doable. Can't even do it. Let's try them with Fnatic. You play the team at captain, and you can get a 3-3 that has a 213 expectation. 213 projection. Interesting. What if we ran them with Misfits? Then you can get a support captain, which is the best we've seen so far. G2 is absurdly expensive this week, so it's no surprise that it's turning out like this. That gives you a 209.7 projection. What if we tried some of the other teams? What if we took G2 out? What if we played Fnatic and Rogue? A 217 projection with Whippo captain. Reasonable. Fnatic and Origen. A 215, also Whippo captain. Fnatic Misfits. A 224 with Kabe captain, so you're actually getting an 80 carry captain if you play Misfits and Fnatic together. That's tough to pass up, I gotta be honest. That's tough to pass up. Even though the odds are worse, it's really tough to pass up the option to get an 80 carry captain versus playing a team captain if you're playing some of these other teams. Especially on a week where G2's in the slate, it is really tough to play a team captain because G2's scores are going to be so high. You would just love to get a G2 player in your lineup, some G2 players in your lineup, but 224 looks pretty good. What if we played Rogue with some other teams? Rogue and Misfits, I assume that's 80 carry captain, and Rogue and Origen. Support captain with that. So Origen's just too expensive, like just straight up. Given the lineups we're getting with Origen, you just can't play Origen with how expensive they are. Rogue doesn't project well either, really. So your best shot, I think, you can either mess with this 80 carry captain of Fnatic and Misfits and hope that G2 has one of those very quick games. You can go support captain with G2 and Misfits. Doesn't feel great, but there's really no other way to do it. You're playing team captain in these other lineups, which I just don't think you want to stomach this week. think you'd rather get more G2 players in the lineup, which is what happens. What if we threw... Let me look at the team pricing here. This is something you can do occasionally. I don't really like doing it, but... Who's the cheapest favorite team? Rogue's only 5,200, which is very cheap. Misfits is 5,000, but Rogue, I think for only 200 more, just makes tons of sense for value. Let's try. What if we inserted Rogue back in, took the other teams out, and said we were going to play Rogue Captain? Then what can we... Or Rogue team, regardless. But we didn't want any Rogue players. Sorry, a little bit longer than normal on the cash game portion, but this is a really interesting week for cash games, in my opinion. Let me get all the Rogue players out, and just say if we were going to use Rogue team with these other combinations, what would happen? So that would get us up to a support captain with Fnatic and G2. You'd still only get 2 G2 players. What happens if we did... Oh. Let me do that. Okay, what if we switch to G2 Misfits? Oh wait, Fnatic's still in there. G2 Misfits. You can now get 3 G2 players because it plays Misfits team, which is even cheaper than Rogue. Well, it doesn't do a ton for us, to be honest with you. It gets you a support captain. That's basically the best thing you can get out of changing that around. I don't know, it's a pretty tough choice. The projections tell you to play Misfits, Misfits and Fnatic, but the Misfits, the difference between Misfits is -185 and G2's -700 is pretty large. And G2's scoring has a pretty good chance to be absolutely wild. It might be a case where you have to go with something like the Misfits G2. Rogue G2 just doesn't get it done either. This is... Yeah, this is a really tough cash build, guys. This is probably one of the tougher cash builds that I've seen. Of course, there's pretty much nothing wrong with just saying go ahead and optimize it and give me what you got. And it would give you... I mean, projection-wise, it's going to give you that Fnatic and Misfits lineup. I did play a lineup really similar to that last week in my heads-ups. A lot of people might have seen me talking about them in the chat, my heads-ups with Wilson. I did play a lineup that faded G2 and got a little bit lucky that G2 lost that day to make that work. But it always just feels bad not having them in your lineup. But Rogue Captain feels pretty bad too. Rogue Team Captain. Man, they are just so expensive. It's just so impossible to get them in at any of these positions. You can go from Larson to Caps. No, can't even do it because I was going to say you could switch teams, but you can't even do that because our team's in the captain spot. Yep, it's a tough cash build, guys. I think the Misfits and Fnatic lineup probably makes the most sense. G2 has a pretty high or pretty decent squash probability, which doesn't score any fantasy points. I think that's what you've got to go for, which is really kind of unfortunate because not having G2 in your cash game lineup is an absolute sin. I really wish that they were playing someone other than Schalke today so that they might be priced down from having lost 2 games last weekend. The problem is they're playing the worst team in the league, so they're still priced absolutely through the roof. For GPP lineups, it just looks like you can play kind of any of the favorites. Let's see, what if you play G2 with the smallest underdog, be SK? Yeah, you're already looking at carry captains. You get perks, 80 carry captain as soon as you go to an underdog. So you can get 80 carry captain lineups with any combination of the teams. Here, you would probably have to downgrade if you wanted to play 4 G2, which is actually probably what I would do. Rather than having perks captain, I would probably try to go Yanko's captain. with 4 G2 players. But that's about, that's about all you can get out of the GPPs, I think. It's trying to go with G2 and somebody. You can try Fnatic and somebody if you want to prey on the G2 kind of squash victory. And you're going to be able to get Reckless Captain with any of the underdogs. So, interesting slate. Hopefully, if you guys have any more questions, feel free to hit me up on Twitter and Discord, anything like that. We'll chat it out. It's definitely an interesting slate with a lot of different things that could happen, and a little bit less up in the air maybe than last week's, actually. So we'll see how everything goes. I'll talk to you guys later, and have a good one.